So I just have a question. Why does it seem like so many of us black men seem to be like we're fighting for our pussy in prison? Let's talk about it. What's up, family? You know who I am. I'm Dr. Larry Smith. I'm a historian, history professor, entrepreneur, and I got a lot of social commentary inside of me. And so I've decided to extend my social media to YouTube. So welcome to Dr. Larry Speaks Truth, because here we speak in the truth, or as I see it, or observe it. So let's get into it. Black men seem to have this real fragile sense of masculinity. I was on social media and I commented on someone's post who was talking about men nowadays being super soft, more soft than men of the past. And on one hand, yes, I do agree with that sentiment. Men are a lot more emotionally driven, a lot more sensitive today than the men I grew up with, and perhaps some of the men that you all grew up with. Because men were taught back then to be quiet about your emotions, to hold everything in and just trudge your way through life, push through life, push through life. That was considered masculinity. But today, these men, us nowadays, many of us are more inclined to express ourselves and express how we feel. But I have seen the extreme version of that, especially on social media, but also in real life. However, as I told the young man, I said, I agree and disagree with your perspective, because on the same flip side of the same coin, there is kind of this push towards a hypersensitive aggression. Some call it hypermasculinity. Some call it toxic masculinity. There's been many names and terms and discussions on this phenomenon. But for me, it's a hypersensitive masculinity that is the opposite of the hypersensitive sensitivity, or the hypersense of, some might call, femininity or feminine energy in men. And so there is a sense that both extremes are occurring, and sometimes they occur simultaneously. So for example, I've seen men in those, pop the balloon challenges here on YouTube, and there'll be men who are going back and forth with women about their feelings, about how their feelings were hurt at something a woman said, or whatever the case may be. But you see these men who are both extremely, extremely sensitive and emotive. And then on the other end, you see them still want to have, like I've seen men who say, well, I want to wash all the makeup off your face, or I want you to act like XYZ in order to be seen as a woman for me as a high caliber man, which is the extreme opposite, the hyper assertiveness, the hyper masculinity. So yes, and as black men, we are seemingly dedicated to just protecting our masculinity, which in my opinion seems to be very, very, very fragile, in need of protection. That's the real question. Why is your masculinity in need of being protected? Now, let's be clear. This isn't a heterosexual or a homosexual conversation. I have seen the exact same male fragility as it relates to masculinity from either sexual orientation, from different people. It could be a straight man or a gay, queer man. Either way, it's present. Now, I'm not going to be naive. Having studied history for damn near 30 years, I know that a lot of it comes from the social construct of black manhood that was created during the institution of slavery. If we're being honest, we know that black manhood, while it existed in Africa and had a different form in Africa, and let's be clear on that too, even Africans today, post-colonialism, have a different version of manhood that would have been present in Africa prior to European colonization. European masculinity, in my opinion, is fluid, right? It's fluid. Sometimes a European male is able to emote and have emotion and show how he feels, while at the same time that not be a damning of his masculinity or of his manhood. He has the right to be hyper aggressive, and that's not seen as a negative. Look at Donald Trump. Look at the Republican Party. Look at how white masculinity and how they project it as a force. Many times as a force of evil. Many times as a force of harm. But it's seen as strength and power and all of these things. But black male masculinity, specifically now post-colonialism in Africa, but even specifically post-slavery in the United States, is an interesting construct, right? It seems as though, in my opinion, that black men are trying to find out what it means to be a man, and that they feel that somehow, some way, who they are as men can be taken away. Let me give a few examples. Let's do a homosexual, a gay example. Being a bottom on the receiving end in gay relationships or in gay life, in the gay experience, sometimes is shamed. There's a lot of bottom shaming, because bottom means you're on the receiving end, and that's taken as a feminine, as that you're allowing your masculinity to be stripped away from you, and you're allowing another man to dominate you. Because in the European Western construct of manhood, we're taught that manhood is dominant. We're taught that manhood is aggressive. We're taught that manhood takes possession and control of. So a bottom in a queer relationship or a queer situation is considered less than a man. And no one, it seems, wants to directly label themselves as bottoms, mostly. That is now starting to change a little bit, where people are getting more comfortable in their role and position in gay relationships, and they're not trying to measure the gay relationships by straight relationships. But there is still a huge amount of bottom shaming and anti-bottomness going on in queer and gay spaces. And there's a lot of anti-feminine energy there as well. Not anti-female. It's okay for a woman to represent femininity, but anytime a man has some shred of femininity, for some people, that's a reduction of who he is as a man. In the heterosexual community, as I have noted, and as somehow participated in at one point in my life, I recognize that anything that makes a man seem less than a man, it challenges that man's perception of his masculinity, and he has to somehow protect it or defend his masculinity. So, for example, in social media, just today, the same commentary that I had about the guy that I agreed with his comment and disagreed with his comments, I gave an example of how if a man has good grooming habits, personal grooming habits, if he cleans his nails, if he washes his face with certain, takes care of his skincare and moisturizes and, even bonnets his hair or whatever the hell he does to make himself feel good, look good on a personal health care, on a personal care situation, sometimes some men take that as going too far into the feminine sphere. I even mentioned the example, another example of him, of straight men being able to compliment each other without it having to be quantified that I am not gay or that I am not feminine, that I am a man's man, and it has to be quantified. So, for example, if a man say, dude, your hair is nice, or your beard is nice, they'll say things like, no homo. Or, for example, Pastor Jamal Bryant gave Cam Newton a compliment on his legs. Cam Newton has good legs. This is a beautiful legs. He's an athlete. Why wouldn't he? And so Pastor Jamal Bryant gave him a compliment on his legs in a video. And if you go to the comment section, all of the comment section are so homophobic, so anti-feminine, so anti a black man being able to compliment another black man without it meaning that they're attracted to them sexually or want to be with them in any capacity like that. So they always quantify things with no homo or no or pause whenever something is said that is deemed to be less than man. And so it happens regardless of sexual orientation. And I find it to be quite interesting because it proves the point that black male masculinity is a fragile thing that needs to be protected, defended, promoted. And you see it in many ways. There's all kinds of commentary across social media about what happened to the men. Where are the real men? Or they'll say, I've seen a female, a woman, say things like, who gonna be the woman? Who gonna be the woman? Who gonna be the man? Who gonna be the man? If everybody want to be women, who's going to be the man? And I've heard that a few times. And that is actually a sidebar and can be an entire video in itself. That black women in general sometimes use their knowledge of the fragility of black masculinity against black men as a way to harm and hurt emotionally and psychologically black men. And I believe that that's done intentionally because black women know that that is such a fragile point of contention for black men. But like I said, that's another video for another time. But yes, my sisters, sometimes y'all do uphold and agitate the frustration and the fragility that black men have about their masculinity or their manhood. And so it's a very interesting dance that we have to do as black men to represent who we are without necessarily having to quantify who we are. Like, I don't think a black man should have to say, I'm a masculine, macho man, or I do manly things in order for me to present as a man. You can look at me and see that. Half of y'all hate on the trans women because y'all try to denote that they're quote unquote off men. Which lets me know that it's a performance for y'all. I call it gender performance. Y'all show up and think that if I'm going to be considered a man, I have to act as a man. And let's be honest, gender is about, in a measure, how we've created it in the Western world, performance. You're supposed to act like a boy. I mean, a lot of us have been told that boys don't act like that. Boys don't do that. Boys don't dress like that. Boys don't talk like that. Boys don't argue with women. But yada, yada, yada. It's the performance that is expected of men. Just like there is a performance for some people that is expected of women. But what I have noticed in my 40 plus years of existence is that the performance for men is more strictly held than the performance for women. And it's just an interesting thing. So yes, there is this fragility. This is almost like I said at the onset, black men are constantly fighting to save and protect themselves from being abused and getting that pussy taken. That is what it feels like to me. And I know that might not be the intention. The person might not even be a queer person, but it seems to be a wholesome, well, a whole filled fear of that masculinity somehow being taken somehow from them. It's quite unusual, but it is quite interesting and intriguing and requires some study and some scholarship because a lot of black men aren't even aware consciously in the conscious realm that they show up like that. The gentleman that I made the comment on his post, I don't think his thought process was, I'm a man who is sensitive about masculinity and manhood. But as soon as I said something that he thought, like I said, it's personal grooming, he heard grooming. And he responded in a comment and said, no man should ever groom another man. And I was like, who said that? Where is this coming from? Right? What trauma that you need to unpack that caused that to rise from the mention of the verb to groom, which we're talking in this instance, taking care of your physical self, your teeth, your hair, your nails, your skin. He heard grooming. And it raised another question in my head because he was so animate about not grooming men, but is he that animate about not grooming women? Because to me, grooming is grooming regardless of gender, regardless of sexual orientation. And at the end of the day, I fundamentally disagree with the grooming process, period. That's another conversation for another video as well. So yeah, so there's so many questions, and you can talk for this for hours, and I would love to sit on a panel and have this discussion. Why is black malehood so fragile? Are we still living through the concepts of race and slavery? And what I mean by that is a lot of black male performance, in my opinion, comes across as though it was something that we didn't have before. And the way that we show up was given to us to perform, to come across a certain way. And a lot of it tries to mimic what we perceive from our eyes to be white male social performance. But in my opinion, black men aren't white men. We don't come from the same Neanderthalic fight for survival and space mentality. You got to remember, they come from Europe. You can fit Europe and Africa multiple times. You can fit Europe and the United States a few times. And so they come from this scrambling for territory, scrambling for place, scrambling for resources, having to, they really, 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 really live off of survival of the fittest. Really, that is their mindset. Because in their mindset, there's an evolutionary process happening that if they don't fight for their place, they're going to be going to go extinct, right? On the African continent prior to European colonialism, that wasn't a concept. There was more than enough space, more than enough resources, more than enough for us to share and to barter and to communicate. That didn't mean war didn't happen, but they weren't warring over validation for who they were and for the things that they had, you know? And so that European construct of scarcity really has manifested itself in how men behave and how men show up. That there has to be men in order for the society to continue to go forward. And so men show up having to perform manhood. And like I said, women sometimes have that expectation of those certain ways, which can get very complex in itself, because women want a man who can be emotional and who can show some sense of vulnerability and compassion and sensitivity. But on the same flip side, they want a man to be strong and caveman and a defender and protector and almost emotional. And so it gets kind of complicated in trying to figure out what some women want for some men, because men don't really, it's a different style of thinking. And so, yes, I wonder, what is the driving force behind this black male masculinity fragility? And why is it so important to protect that and to hold on to that and to defend that, even in situations that don't require that defense? Like, I don't believe I have to protect and defend my masculinity in spaces where I don't feel like it's being challenged. I don't dwell in the mindset that my masculinity or whatever part of me is being challenged. I dwell in the space that I show up as I show up. And what energy is appropriate for the moment that I'm in, that's the energy that I express. And so for me, manhood is a combination of being able to utilize both the masculine and the feminine energy when appropriate. Like, so for example, some of the strongest, most masculine expressions is fatherhood. Have you ever seen a man with his newborn baby? That's a delicate, that's a soft moment. That's a quite feminine moment, but there's something so manly about it, you know? Whereas the flip side, if that same child was in danger, that father bear would jump in to protect that child with force, which is a different kind of masculine energy, right? That's not necessarily tapped into that feminine energy power. And so I think as whole people, we should be able to mix and mingle and blend and live in all those energies we have access to. because everything doesn't require one monotone, homogenized energy. It requires you to shift it and change it. And in order to be a person who is in a space, living and giving to the people around you and to yourself. And so, yeah, so I just wanted to get on today, do a video. I'm trying to do one weekly, y'all. Or two, if I get a chance to. I do think about doing more than one weekly. But I wanted to get on, because this was something that was really on my mind and on my heart. And so I said, well, while it's on my mind and my heart, let me sit in front of this camera and talk about this shit. Because this is a very interesting conversation. And you'll see it. Notice it as you're on social media. Notice it in some of the conversations that are between the genders, right? The gender wars. You hear these different constructs of what manhood should be. But I will venture to say the men who are least likely to bend in their manhood and be flexible with it are two, maybe three categories for me. Men who have been abused in some capacity, whether it was physical abuse, mental abuse, verbal abuse from a parent, some type of abuse. Those men have a really hard time bending. Sexual abuse, whatever. The second one are men who didn't really have men in their lives a lot of times. They don't really, they feel like they have to show up as that man, and that nobody should be able to bend that, because that's their perception. I am the man. And I've noticed a lot of them are men who have a bunch of sisters. It was their mom, they grew up with single moms, things like that. They had to show up very early on in their manhood. And so therefore they're stuck there. And then lastly, the men that I see are immature. Men who we have allowed, and there's a lot of men like this, that we have allowed as a community to stay forever age 16. Mentally, emotionally, physically. And they see manhood is definitely performance. It's definitely locker room type of manhood in a high school gym. It's definitely aggressive. It's definitely I have to be the strongest on the playground type of man. But it's immaturity. That manhood usually comes with a level of social awareness of the world that is very limited and very low, and it comes out of their mouths and how they treat women. Nevertheless, black manhood is an interesting social phenomenon that I think should be studied more, to try to understand the nuances, because a lot of us are still operating from slavery mindedness, and that slavery mindedness makes us feel like manhood is something that somebody externally can come and take away from us. And so we have to be fiercely defensive of it, or fiercely protective, guarding it to avoid it from being taken. But I always ask the question, if your manhood can be taken away, was it ever there? That's it. I'm out. My conversation is my conversation. It's my truth. That's why it's Dr. Larry Speaks Truth. Because you're going to get it unfiltered and authentic from how I perceive it and how I think it. A lot of it is based on my observation, but of course, I bring in my wealth of historical knowledge and my wealth of social studies that I have been doing for damn near 30 years. And of course, life experiences and my own personal experiences. But it's my opinion, it's my observation, it's my truth. And that's what you get at Dr. Larry Speaks Truth. And so, until next time, don't forget to like, comment, share, follow. Are you following here? Like, comment, share. Hit the notification bell so when I do post a video, you get notification. You get to watch it so I get my view time. And I'll see y'all in the next video. Peace.